The memory photographer. Henry couldn't remember his own daughter's name, but he could restore a 1940s wedding photo to perfect clarity. Every morning he forgot who he was, but never forgot how to bring other people's memories back to life. The Riverside Memory Care Center was where people went to forget. Beige hallways, soft lighting, the gentle hum of confusion that comes when 60 minds struggle to hold on to yesterday. Residents wandered through their days like ghosts of themselves, chasing memories that slipped away like water through their fingers. But in room 237, something extraordinary was happening. Henry Walsh sat at a small desk by the window, surrounded by photographs. Not new ones, but old ones, damaged ones, pictures that had survived decades in attics and basements and forgotten boxes, bearing the wounds of time, water stains, tears, faded colors, missing pieces, photos that families had given up as irreparable. With steady hands that seemed to remember skills his mind had forgotten, Henry worked magic. He would study each photograph like a detective examining evidence. A wedding portrait from 1942 where the bride's face was completely obscured by water damage. A family reunion from 1963 where half the people had been torn away. A baby's first Christmas from 1978 where time had faded the colors to ghostly shadows. Henry couldn't tell you what he'd eaten for breakfast. He often couldn't recognize his own reflection in the mirror. But somehow, impossibly, he could look at these broken photographs and see exactly what they were supposed to be. His technique was mysterious, almost spiritual. He would close his eyes and run his fingers over the damaged areas, as if reading the memory, like Braille. Then, he would begin to work, mixing paints with the precision of a master, rebuilding faces from shadows, restoring colors from faint hints, completing torn edges with brushstrokes that seemed guided by the ghosts in the pictures. The staff at Riverside had noticed Henry's obsession with photographs 3 months after his arrival. They'd found him in the activity room at 3 a.m, carefully working on a portrait someone had brought for a craft project. The night nurse, Maria Santos, had planned to guide him back to bed. Instead, she stood watching in amazement as Henry transformed a badly damaged wedding photo into something that looked professionally restored. "Where did you learn to do that?" Maria had asked. Henry looked up at her with eyes that were clear but confused. "I'm sorry, miss. Do I know you?" Henry Walsh was losing his mind to Alzheimer's, but his hands remembered every technique he'd spent 60 years perfecting as a professional photographer and restoration artist. His conscious memory was disappearing, but his muscle memory, his artistic instincts, his ability to see what photographs could become, that remained untouched by the disease. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because this story isn't just about photographs. It's about how love transcends memory, and how the heart remembers what the mind forgets. Stay with me for a story that will change how you think about what it means to truly remember. Henry Walsh hadn't always been a confused old man in a memory care facility. 2 years ago, he'd been the most sought-after photo restoration expert on the East Coast. His studio, Walsh Photo Preservation, had been featured in magazines, recommended by museums, trusted by families who needed miracles performed on their most precious memories. For 6 decades, Henry had been the man people called when disaster struck their photographs. House fires, floods, attic discoveries, estate cleanouts. Whenever families found damaged pictures they couldn't bear to lose, they brought them to Henry. He had restored Civil War portraits, saved wedding photos from the Depression era, brought back baby pictures that were the only images parents had of children who died young. Henry's gift wasn't just technical skill. He had an intuitive understanding of what photographs meant to people. He could look at a damaged picture and see not just what was broken, but what healing it would bring to fix it. Every photograph he restored was someone's grandfather, someone's wedding day, someone's last Christmas together. His wife Eleanor had often watched him work late into the night on particularly challenging restorations. "You care about these strangers' pictures more than they do sometimes," she'd tease. "That's because I know what it's like to lose the only picture you have," Henry would reply, thinking of his own parents' wedding photo, destroyed in a house fire when he was 12. Sometimes a photograph is the only proof that a moment of love actually happened. Eleanor understood. She'd been married to Henry for 43 years, watched him build his reputation one rescued memory at a time. She knew that his passion for restoration came from a deep belief that memories were sacred, that preserving them was a form of immortality. But Alzheimer's didn't care about Henry's noble mission. The disease crept into his mind slowly at first, then, with increasing cruelty. He started forgetting clients' names, then their faces, then entire conversations. He would begin working on a photograph and forget what he was supposed to be doing. Projects that once took him hours began taking days, then weeks. The final blow came when Henry forgot Eleanor's name. They were having breakfast on a Tuesday morning in spring. Eleanor was reading him a letter from their daughter Sarah, who lived in California with her 2 children. Henry listened politely, the way he listened to everything now, with the courteous attention of someone who didn't want to admit he was lost. "Sarah says little Emma is learning to play piano," Eleanor said, "just like her grandmother did." Henry smiled and nodded. "That's nice. Is Sarah your daughter?" The question hung in the air like a physical blow. Eleanor set down the letter and looked at the man she'd been married to for nearly half a century. He was looking at her with genuine curiosity, waiting for an answer about whether Sarah was her daughter. He didn't remember Sarah. He didn't remember Emma. He didn't remember Eleanor. But somehow, incomprehensibly, when Mrs. Chen from down the street brought him a water-damaged photograph of her grandmother's funeral, Henry restored it to perfect clarity in 3 hours. His conscious memory was gone, but his artistic memory lived on, untouched and mysterious. The decision to move Henry to Riverside Memory Care was the hardest thing Eleanor had ever done. But she couldn't care for him safely at home anymore. He would wander away, forget to eat, forget where he was. The man who had spent his life preserving other people's memories could no longer preserve his own. On his last day at home, Eleanor packed a box of Henry's restoration supplies: brushes, paints, magnifying glasses, all the tools that had made him a master of his craft. The staff at Riverside had told her that familiar objects sometimes provided comfort to Alzheimer's patients. She didn't know she was giving Henry the key to his final masterpiece. At Riverside, Henry's gift revealed itself gradually. It started when another resident, Margaret Thompson, mentioned having a box of old photographs that had been damaged in her basement flood. Her daughter Linda had planned to throw them away. "They're ruined," Linda told the staff. "Water got into everything. You can barely see the faces." Henry was sitting nearby during visiting hours, quietly working on a puzzle. But when Linda showed one of the damaged photographs to her mother, Henry looked up. "May I see that?" he asked politely. Linda handed him the photograph. It was a family portrait from the 1950s, badly water-stained, faces obscured by dark blotches, edges torn and missing. Then he carried it to his room and returned with his art supplies. What happened next was pure magic. Working with the focus of a surgeon and the touch of an angel, Henry began to restore the photograph. He mixed colors that matched faded skin tones, rebuilt faces from shadows and fragments, recreated missing sections with brushstrokes that seemed to remember what had been there. 3 hours later, he handed Linda a photograph that looked like it had been taken yesterday. Every face was clear, every detail preserved, every expression restored to living clarity. Linda stared at the picture and began to cry. "How did you do this? How did you know what my grandfather looked like? You've never seen him before." Henry looked confused. "I'm sorry, dear. Do I know you?" Words spread through Riverside and beyond. The man with Alzheimer's who could restore photographs became local legend. Families began bringing their damaged pictures, not expecting miracles, but somehow receiving them. Henry worked on each photograph with the same mysterious intuition. He couldn't remember the names of the staff members who fed him lunch, but he could look at a photograph missing half its image and somehow know exactly how to complete it. He would forget conversations 5 minutes after having them, but he could spend 8 hours restoring a single picture with perfect concentration. Dr. Patricia Lee, the neurologist overseeing Henry's care, was fascinated by his condition. "We've seen cases where Alzheimer's patients retain specific skills," she explained to Eleanor during one of their monthly meetings. "Musicians who can still play piano, artists who can still paint. But Henry's case is extraordinary. He's not just maintaining old skills, he seems to be accessing memories that aren't his own. Eleanor didn't understand what Dr. Patricia Lee meant at first, but that was the beginning of a story that would unfold with surprising depth. Lee meant until she watched Henry work on a photograph that broke her heart. A young woman named Jennifer Adams had brought her grandfather's army portrait from World War II. The photograph was severely damaged, missing most of the uniform details and half of her grandfather's face. "He died in France," Jennifer explained to Henry. "This is the only picture we have of him in uniform. My grandmother kept it for 60 years, but it got damaged in our house fire. I know you probably can't do much with it, but—" Henry took the photograph and studied it with that familiar intensity. Then he began to work. But this time, Eleanor watched him paint details that weren't visible in the original image. Military insignia, uniform decorations, background elements that seemed to come from Henry's imagination. When he finished, the portrait was stunning. A young soldier in perfect detail, every button and badge precisely rendered, standing against a background that looked authentically 1940s. Jennifer gasped when she saw it. "How did you know about his silver star? How did you know he was in the 82nd Airborne? That information wasn't in the picture." Henry looked at her blankly. "I don't remember, dear. Did I do something for you?" Later that evening, Eleanor asked Dr. Lee about what she'd witnessed. How could Henry know details about a stranger's grandfather? Dr. Lee was quiet for a long moment. "There are theories about collective memory, about how trauma and experience can be stored in ways we don't understand. Henry worked on thousands of military photographs over the years. Maybe his brain is accessing a collective database of visual memory, reconstructing what he knows military portraits from that era should look like." But Eleanor had a different theory. Maybe he's not just restoring photographs. What if he's remembering them? Maybe he's channeling the memories of the people in them. It sounded impossible, but Henry's restorations had become so accurate, so eerily detailed, that families began calling them miraculous. He would restore baby pictures with perfect recreations of family members who weren't visible in the original images. He would add details to wedding photos that matched family stories passed down through generations. The most extraordinary case came 6 months into Henry's residency at Riverside. A woman named Carol Mitchell brought him a photograph that was more damaged than image. It had been in her family's house fire, and only small fragments remained, part of a woman's dress, a child's hand, the edge of what might have been a birthday cake. "The fire department said there was no way to restore this," Carol told Henry, "but this is the only picture I have of my daughter's 3rd birthday party. She died the next month from leukemia. It's all I have left of her being happy." Henry took the fragments and spread them on his desk. There was so little left that most restoration experts would have declared it hopeless. But Henry studied the pieces like an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. For 2 weeks, he worked on the photograph. Eleanor watched him labor over every detail, building an entire scene from fragments and imagination. He painted a little girl's face from the shadow of a smile. He reconstructed a birthday party from the curve of a balloon string. He brought back joy from the memory of laughter frozen in silver halides and time. When he finished, Carol Mitchell collapsed in tears. The photograph showed her daughter Emma, exactly as she remembered her, surrounded by friends and family, blowing out candles on a birthday cake, captured in a moment of pure childhood joy. "How did you know?" Carol whispered. "How did you know what she looked like? How did you know about the unicorn cake topper? How did you know Uncle Robert was there?" Henry looked at the photograph with satisfaction, then at Carol with confusion. "I'm sorry, miss. Have we met?" That night, Eleanor sat with Henry in his room, watching him clean his brushes with the same methodical care he'd used for 60 years. He didn't recognize her as his wife, but he seemed comfortable with her presence. "Henry," she said gently, "do you know what you're doing when you work on these pictures?" He looked up at her with eyes that were kind but empty of recognition. "I think I'm helping people remember," he said. "I can't remember much myself anymore, but I can see what the pictures want to be. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense. Henry was losing his own memories, but he'd become a guardian of everyone else's. His fading mind had somehow opened a channel to collective memory, to the universal human experience of love and loss and celebration captured in photographs. Dr. Lee documented Henry's case for medical journals, but she knew that science couldn't fully explain what was happening. Henry's gift transcended neurology. He was operating in a realm where love and memory intersected in ways that defied understanding. The end came suddenly, as it often does with Alzheimer's. Henry had a rapid decline in the spring, losing the ability to speak, then to recognize objects, then to care for himself. But until the very last week of his life, he could still restore photographs. His final project was a picture that Eleanor brought him, their own wedding photo, which had been damaged years ago in their basement flood. For 20 years, Eleanor had meant to have it professionally restored, but never got around to it. Henry took the photograph with hands that now shook constantly. His eyes struggled to focus. His movements were slow and uncertain. But when he began to work, something extraordinary happened. His hands steadied. His eyes cleared. For 3 hours, he was the master craftsman he'd always been. When he finished, Eleanor saw their wedding day as if it had happened yesterday. Every detail was perfect, every face glowing with joy, every decoration in flower exactly as she remembered. But more than that, she could see the love. Henry had somehow painted their love into the photograph, made it visible in ways that the original had never captured. It was Henry's final gift to her, a perfect memory of their beginning, restored by hands that could no longer remember her name, but had never forgotten how much he loved her. Henry died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. At his memorial service, the walls of the funeral home were covered with photographs he'd restored. Hundreds of memories brought back to life by a man who'd lost his own. Families he'd helped came to pay their respects to the stranger who'd given them back their most precious moments. Eleanor spoke at the service, standing before all those rescued memories. Henry always believed that photographs were proof that love happened, she said. He spent his last years giving that proof back to people who thought they'd lost it forever. He couldn't remember our anniversary, but he remembered what love looked like. And maybe that's all that really matters. After the service, Carol Mitchell approached Eleanor. She carried the restored photograph of her daughter's birthday party, now framed and treasured. "I wanted you to know," Carol said, "that picture of Emma hangs in our living room now. Every morning when I wake up, I see her smiling, and I remember that love doesn't die just because memory fades. Your husband gave me back my daughter's joy. I'll never forget that gift." Eleanor hugged this stranger who had become family through shared loss and restored love. "Henry would have been happy to know that," she said. "He always said the best photographs were the ones that made people remember how much they were loved." 6 months after Henry's death, Eleanor received a package with no return address. Inside was a restored photograph she'd never seen before. It showed Henry as a young man standing in his first photography studio, holding a camera and smiling with the confidence of someone who knew he'd found his calling. The photograph had been severely damaged, torn and faded almost beyond recognition. But someone had restored it to perfect clarity, using techniques that looked exactly like Henry's work. There was a note attached. "This was in my grandmother's things after she passed. She must have had it restored by your husband years ago. But we found it damaged again in her effects. Someone at the photography club saw the news story about Henry and restored it as a memorial tribute. We thought you should have it." Eleanor held the photograph and smiled through her tears. Even in death, Henry was still bringing memories back to life, still proving that love happened, still showing that the heart remembers what the mind forgets. She placed the photograph on her mantel, next to their restored wedding picture. 2 images of the same man, separated by 60 years but connected by the same gift, the same love, the same understanding that memory is sacred and worth preserving. That night, Eleanor dreamed about Henry in his studio, surrounded by thousands of photographs, working with steady hands and clear eyes, bringing back moments that time had tried to steal. In the dream, he looked up at her and smiled. "I remember you," he said. "I remember everything." And Eleanor knew that somewhere, in the place where memories go when the mind can no longer hold them, Henry was still working, still restoring what was broken, still proving that love transcends time and memory and death itself. Because the heart remembers what the mind forgets, and love, once photographed, becomes immortal.